Assalamu alaikum dear students, how are you? I hope you will all be fine. So today the topic which I have selected to teach you people are direct and indirect objects. So students, if you remember in the last lecture we studied about transitive and intransitive verbs, and I told you how would you identify a transitive verb. A transitive verb is always there in a sentence which has an object, and an intransitive verb is there in a sentence which does not have an object. This is the main difference between the transitive and intransitive verb. So when we talk about direct and indirect object, we are always going to find a direct and indirect object in a sentence which has a transitive verb. This is the main thing which you have to keep in mind. And a transitive verb means an action verb. Transitive verbs are always action verbs because this is the reason they are action verbs, that object is there and object receives the direct action of the subject. So this is the main thing which you have to keep in mind, that whenever you have to identify a direct and indirect object, the verb will always be transitive in the sentence. Now we have to see that what is a direct object. A direct object answers the question on whom or on what the action is done. And you're always going to find a direct object right after a transitive verb, right after a action verb. My brother bought what? My brother bought a model. So in this sentence, model will be a direct object because this direct object is receiving the direct action of the subject. And what is the subject in the sentence? The subject is my brother. So in this way, we have located a direct object in a sentence. Then we come to the next idea. A direct object can never follow a linking verb. A very, very important point you have to keep in your mind, as I have already told, that in the case of the direct object, you are always going to have a transitive, you are always going to have an action verb. A linking verb cannot have a a linking verb cannot have a direct object because a linking verb does not express action. Like you can see in the example, Julia Morgan was an architect. Now, Julia Morgan is the subject, and right after subject, we have a linking verb was, and right after was we have another noun. So what this was is doing over here, this was is just linking Julia Morgan with the other noun, which is the architect. It means that was is a linking verb. It is not expressing any action. So this is the reason that architect cannot be a direct object. So this is a very important point which you have to keep in mind, that in the case of direct and indirect object, the verb will always be transitive. Now we come to the idea about the indirect object. Sometimes we have a sentence where we have two kinds of objects. One object is direct and the other object is indirect. Direct object we have already discussed, that a direct object receives the direct action of the subject. This is the reason that this is called direct object. But an indirect object is that noun or pronoun which expresses about that person in the sentence for whom the action is done. This is a very important point which you have to keep in mind. Like you can see over here, an indirect object is a noun, pronoun, or word group that usually comes between the verb and the direct object. An indirect object tells to whom or to what, or for whom or for what the action of the verb is done. So you are always going to find a noun or a pronoun which would be telling you about the person for whom the action is done in the sentence. So such kind of object will be called indirect object. Then we have the other idea. We have some examples over here, and by having these examples, your idea is going to be more clear. I gave my only copy to his friend. Now, if you analyze this sentence, I gave what? My only copy. So, only copy will be the direct object. To his friend, it means for whom the action is done. For friend, the action is done. So, friend is an indirect object over here. The moon casts what? An array. It means an array is the direct object, and for whom the action is done, the landscape. So the landscape will be indirect object. The father cooked what? Dinner. It means dinner is the direct object. For his daughter, for whom the action is done, for daughter the action is done. So daughter will be indirect object. So I hope that your idea of the direct and indirect object would be quite much clear by now. You're always going to remember that the direct action, the object which receives the direct action of the subject is direct object, and the other object which expresses about the person for whom the action is done is called indirect object. And direct and indirect objects you are always going to find when the verb will be transitive in the sentence, when the verb will be action verb in the sentence, not a linking verb. Now we have some practice sentences over here. Amna gave her a letter. Amna is the subject over here. Gave is a transitive verb. Amna gave what? The direct object is letter, and for whom the action is done. Her is the pronoun which expresses that person for whom the action is done. So her will be indirect object. She bought what? Two presents. Two presents is a direct object over here, and her will be indirect object. They taught us English. They taught what? English. So English will be direct object, and us is expressing the people for whom the action is done. So us will be indirect object. He brought what? A camera. A camera is direct object, and her will be indirect object. She bought what? Tickets. So tickets will be direct object, and him is expressing the person for whom the tickets are bought. So him will be indirect object. She threw him a ball. So a ball will be a direct object, and him will be indirect object. You can see, students, that all the pronouns which are used over here as an indirect object, they are objective pronouns because they are coming in the place of an object. She passed what? A comment. Comment is a direct object, and her is an indirect object. She made what? A cake. A cake is a direct object, and us is here as a indirect object. Did she show you what? Her paintings. Paintings will be direct object. You and your sister. You and your sister will be indirect object. So in this way, you can easily identify the direct and indirect object if you keep in your mind that you are always going to have an action verb in the sentence. Only then you are going to have a direct and indirect object. Otherwise, in the case of linking verb, you are not going to have any direct or indirect object in the sentence. Okay, students, I hope your idea of direct and indirect objects would be quite much clear by now. In the next lecture, we are going to start with the complements and the kinds of complements. So keep on revising your lectures, whatever concepts of the grammar we have done till now. Allah Hafiz, students. May God bless you.